Hello there. It's time to look at this video again. All right, so today we're going to look at 4 chapters from your book. So we're going to start with chapter 3. We'll do 3, 4, 5, and 6. Take notes. Without that, you will be lost when it comes to taking the quizzes. So I would strongly recommend that you take notes. So let's get started. And as usual, I'm going to hit the play button. You're going to stop seeing me. You're going to see the screen and get your pen and paper ready. I'm going to hide this little thing here. And let's get started. Okay, play. All right, so we'll start with chapter 3, which is all about speaking freely and ethically. And in this chapter, we'll talk about 3 things: speaking freely, speaking ethically, and building ethos. Ethos is your credibility. Okay, so let's start with number 1, which is the highlighted one, speaking freely. You know, when you are in the US, you end up talking about free speech. You know, as an immigrant, I take this free speech thing, very seriously. I'm grateful for that. So what is free speech? It is an open exchange of information, all right? So you can share what you want to share, and you are free to do that because this country allows that, okay? So free speech is the open exchange of information. And ethics, again, this is a definition you want to know. Ethics are your beliefs, your values, and your moral principles. You know, things that you think are right versus wrong. All right, those are your ethics. Like capital punishment, right, wrong. Everyone has their own way of thinking about it, right? And so what you believe in, you know, killing a person is wrong, right? Universally, I think that's kind of, everyone seems to have that that ethic, right? So that's kind of how we define ethic: beliefs, values, moral principles. And of course, as a speaker, one thing you want to remember is, yes, this is a free country, you know, free speech is allowed, but as a speaker, you should try to be responsible and be ethical in the way you communicate or share information, okay? So let's now then talk about the US Constitution, right? This is something that is a part of our Constitution. This is the First Amendment that says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. And I've literally just pulled it out of the 1791 First Amendment in our Constitution that guaranteed free speech. So clearly, I mean, it's very much a part of our country and our Constitution, and we all believe in speaking freely, right? The government can't tell you not to share your opinion. In 1918, there was a little bit of a change. Now, this happened around the time of the war, and the government said, if you speak out against us, if you say anything against us, you will be punished. You may be thrown in prison, right? So that was called the Sedition Act of 1918. And then a couple years later, they declared that unconstitutional. They pulled it out, and they said, if you want to criticize society, you can. If you want to share your opinion about the war, you can, because this is a free country. Okay, so Sedition Act 1918, and then, you know, that act was then declared unconstitutional and pulled out of the Constitution. Now, around the 1920, the Supreme Court also put out this other law, right? And they said, you can't really, say something that can be dangerous to other people. So, for example, if you do something that, if you say something that scare people or create real danger where people can get, like, kill each other or something crazy like that, the government will restrict you. Okay, in 1920, the ACLU was one of those organizations that wanted to protect the rights of minorities, and that kind of was formed in the 1920s. Okay, Now, how is it in the 20th century? Well, in the 20th century, in 1964, the Supreme Court said, well, free speech is an important aspect of our democracy, right? Because we are a democracy. Um, so you are allowed to say whatever to whoever, right? Even if have these slanderous statements, right? You're saying something terrible about someone. That's okay as long as you're not doing it with some real evil intent in mind. It's okay to do that. So you can say something about someone, even if that's not true, it's still something that you can't get sued or you can't get thrown into prison for that unless you are doing it with some serious evil. All right. So malice is what we call evil. So it's really interesting how, this whole concept of free speech and, things that were brought in, pulled out, because as a country, we truly, value our democracy and our freedom to say whatever we want, right? So that's the 20th century. Um, in the 1960s, students at the University of California in Berkeley, they were protesting, right? That some students had been arrested or whatever. And, you would think, wow, it happened at a university. But the truth is, you know, college campuses have always supported the freedom of speech, and universities will tell you, it's okay to share your opinion. In fact, if you have different opinions and there's a clash, that's okay. That's what university is all about, that you share your opinion, you know, agree to disagree, and so everybody is allowed to speak freely. In the 20th century, there were some other things that also happened, right? So um, they were talking about nonverbal stuff, right? Let's say President Trump um, is saying nobody should be allowed to burn the American flag. Well, so let's fact check that, right? So burning an American flag is a nonverbal act, right? And in 1989, they said that it should, is subject to the same protections and limitations as verbal. So if you had to fact check, is he right or is he wrong to say that you're allowed to burn the American flag? Trump is saying, nope, nobody should be allowed. The truth is, nonverbal acts have the same protections as verbal free speech. So he's actually wrong because, people are allowed to burn the American flag if they are upset and if they want to show their frustration. I mean, truly, nobody really should be doing that anyway. But this is, we're talking about, being thrown in prison for something like that. Because in some other countries, actually, that could happen. But in this country, you could have nonverbal acts of, that disapprove something, and you can be thrown into jail for that. All right. So it is really a act that is protected by the First Amendment. Okay. Now, 9/11 happened. You guys probably were too young to see those planes, go into a building and kill thousands of people. I was there watching it on TV, and yeah, I shiver every time I think about it. But it was around this time, around 9/11, where you had this Patriot Act, right? So in this act, basically the government could watch you. So they brought in their investigative powers so that they could watch you, they could catch the person or persons that, hurt people, kill people. And so, when they had this Patriot Act put in place, um, it clearly had an effect on free speech, right? On religious freedom, because you had, FBI folks, going into mosques and, doing horrible, like, basically interrogating people, things like that. But they had to really find out who did it. And the Patriot Act actually allowed it. So it definitely had an effect on our free speech. Okay. But in general, the free speech movements, all over the world actually have gained a lot of visibility, right? So this, we are Charlie, that slogan was adopted for the French publication. I don't know if you guys know, but there was a drawing of the Prophet Muhammad, and in the Islamic communities, you're not allowed to really do that, but you know some the publication, they actually had a actual drawing of him, and someone who was a staunch believer went into the French publication and just shot a lot of people. It was just horrible. But again, in the US, and we saw a lot of social media publicity about that stuff. People were sharing information. In the US, it actually does hold true. The like button is also free speech. You like something, it's okay to share it. If you want to say something, it's okay to do it. Doesn't always work in other countries, but it definitely works in the US, and that movement has gained visibility over the years, all over the internet. Okay, so we've talked about speaking freely, but again, we want to remember that we want to be ethical when we share this information. So let's then talk about how to also be ethical when you speak freely. Okay. So when you are constructing your speeches, you want to have a socially responsible goal. Okay, either you're informing someone or you're persuading someone, but you're not coercing people. Okay, you're not giving them false information. You are being ethical in sharing what you're sharing, and your agenda. I mean, why do you want to inform? Why do you want to persuade? That stuff has to be transparent. That has to be clear. You can't just keep that agenda hidden, and you shouldn't really have a terrible agenda for something like this anyway. So have an ethical goal, have a clear, responsible, ethical goal when you start to construct your speeches, and use sound evidence. Use some serious logical reasoning, right? Use your critical thinking skills, your critical writing skills. Formulate an argument, not coerce people emotionally, right? Actually have a sensible, logical, practical, analytical argument, okay? And give enough information to your audience to help them make a decision. Don't make that decision for them, but share all the pros and cons for that decision and help them make that decision. Yes, you can kind of share your point of view and therefore ask them to believe your point of view, and that's what we call persuasion. But don't do that at the cost of letting some information slip and not telling them that information, because that is then not ethical, right? Tell them everything, tell them why they should believe in your perspective. Okay, so if you're making up stuff, if you're emotionally manipulating people instead of using logical arguments, then we call that unethical. Okay, so kind of stay away from that, focus on sound reasoning, sound evidence. All right, and be sensitive and tolerant to differences. So this is another definition you should know: accommodation. It's a sensitivity to the feelings and needs and interests and backgrounds of other people. Know who's in your audience. Know that your audience, your classroom, whether it's virtual or in person, is made up of people with different ideas, different feelings, different needs, different interests, and they come from different backgrounds, different religions, right? Nobody's asking you to abandon what you feel. That said, it's important to demonstrate the willingness to sort of listen to opposing viewpoints and be open to different belief systems, and avoid language that is biased. All right. Definitely avoid using bad language or offensive language. And be honest. Okay. Be honest. Excuse me. If you are sharing a hypothetical illustration, then tell us that it's hypothetical, that it's not based in fact. You could say something like, imagine that, or for a second, think, hypothetically, right? To use words like that to show that you are being honest. When you're being hypothetical about something, then make it clear that it's just an example. It hasn't really happened in real life. Okay, imagine that. Think for a second if that could be a possibility. Those are the kinds of phrases you could use to display your honesty, right? It also builds on your own credibility when you do that. Okay. Now, this is a really interesting example. Honestly, it was really hard to find this photo, and so you're seeing a little bit of sort of glitchy blurriness in here. But this is old. This is 1998. This is actually then President Bill Clinton, and he had been accused of inappropriate relationships with Monica Lewinsky, and you see Hillary Clinton standing right there. And he kept saying, like, well, I didn't have these relationships with this woman. The truth was that he had, and then he was impeached for it. But he lied, right? So it's really hard for us as people to forgive dishonesty. You are willing to forgive somebody who had an inappropriate relationship. All right, well, you were married, you shouldn't have done that, but I will forgive you for that. What I will not forgive is your dishonesty, that you're lying to me. Like that really bothers me, right? That bothers all of us. And so speaking ethically, is important. If you don't know something, say you don't know it. But speak the truth. It is really, really hard to build your ethos back up when you're caught lying. Okay. And do not plagiarize. Now, this is something we all know, right? I hope you do. So, if it's not your work, don't steal somebody else's ideas as your own. You can always say, that this quotation was by blah, 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 whoever it is, right? Don't present somebody else's ideas as yours. Okay, do your own work, and you can always acknowledge that your source was from a specific journal or magazine or celebrity said it or whatever it is, right? So give credit to ideas that are not your own. Give credit to that person who had that idea. All right, don't steal. A term that you want to remember here is patch writing. Lacing a speech with compelling phrases that you find in a source without citing the source or relying heavily on the sentence structure of the source. So basically, if you just copy paste an entire, paragraph from a book, online book or whatever, and you throw it into your speech, and then you kind of write it like, oh, this is part of my essay, instead of really kind of citing the source or sharing who has said this. We call that batch writing. Okay, so again, important not to plagiarize. You can get in real trouble in college if you do. I know of stories where people have basically been kicked out of college after 3 years of being in the program, and it just leaves a really bad record. um, it's wrong. I mean, has it happened before? Yes. I mean, we had Melania Trump, copy paste Michelle Obama's, speech, and first lady, doing that to another first lady. I mean, it's just really wrong. It's just off, and it leaves a bitter, sort of taste in your mouth. And just stay away from it. Just learn it right the first time. Okay. So we've talked about speaking freely and ethically. And then, let's look at the last section of this chapter, and that is building your ethos, right? Building your credibility. So, ethos is basically how I would perceive a speaker, how as I, an audience member, would perceive a speaker. So if I see somebody like First Lady Michelle Obama, right, and I hear her talk, the perception that I have of her is that she is a strong, competent woman, she knows what she's talking about. She's so dynamic, and I totally trust her. And she's ethical in the way she shares information. That is her ethos, right? And so when you are out there and you're on the stage and you're talking, the audience members listening to you are actually judging you, right? Um, Judging if you are trustworthy, judging if they should be listening to you, right? And so you want to make sure that you continue to build your ethos or credibility. All right, let's move on then to the next chapter. Take a break if you need to, stop this video, come back to it. We're going to move on to the next one called Listening to Speeches, Chapter 4. All right, here we go. So, yes, this is a speech class where you are taught how to structure and deliver your speeches. But it's also important to be a good listener. And that is what this particular chapter is about. And we're going to talk about these 5 things: components of listening, barriers to effective listening, identify and implement listening strategies, improving critical listening and thinking skills, and effectively evaluating speeches. So let's get started. Components of listening. Understanding how people listen in general can help us as speakers connect better with our audiences. All right, the more you listen, the better you get with your arguments. So a lot of employers, really like folks who are listening, paying attention. It helps with your career. It helps with your relationships as well. So let's learn about how people listen, and in addition, then learn how to improve our ability to connect with our audiences. Okay, so there are 5 components to listening. So think about, right now, right here, you're listening to me talk, and you are sort of singling out on specific messages, right? Um, you may not be able to comprehend everything that I'm talking about, but at least some of it, right? And then you're focusing on that message, which means you're attending to what I'm saying. Not only are you focusing, now you're trying to understand, you're trying to make sense of what I'm saying, right? And then, let's say in 2 hours, you're trying to remember what you heard, right? So you are recalling those ideas. And then, there might come a quiz like in a week from now where you are actually responding or reacting to what you may have heard. Same thing with any kind of speech. Audience members are selecting specific messages from your speech. They're focusing on it. They're trying to make sense of it. And then maybe an hour later, they're having a cup of tea and they're actually remembering it. And they perhaps want to respond to what you have to say as well. So those are your components of listening. Okay. It's interesting how we spend 55% of our time listening, right? So speaking is 17, reading is 17, writing is 11%. You do definitely do a lot more listening. And so that's why it's an important component of this particular class, to talk about that. You listen to a 45-minute, lecture, another extra minute in that lecture and you are done. You're just done. Okay. And that's what we call listener fatigue. And that is something that is quite real. That's why you should be taking breaks as you watch my videos here. Even though they're long videos, you can take a break after every chapter, right? The working memory theory of listening says that a listener's capacity is reached at one point, right? And when it does, a listener really cannot focus or concentrate or even remember what he or she has heard. So listener fatigue is real. And you should know this particular theory, the working memory theory of listening. You see there. Of course, there are other barriers to listening too, right? I'm talking here and you're thinking, oh my God, I got to take the dog out for a walk, right? And your brain is somewhere else. That's a personal concern. Or, you have a baby in the house crying away, right? Outside distractions of some kind. Or somebody skateboarding outside, and that's kind of where you want to be, right? And of course, that could be prejudice. Like, I hate this class. I don't want to listen to anything here. That's prejudice. I mean, you just don't like something, right? You don't want to be there because you just don't like it. So that is harder to focus when that's the case. Of course, there could be someone who is prejudiced against you, which is a heavier word, but um, they hate you for who you are or how you look or whatever it is, right? And then they're not listening to you. So that can happen as well. I pray that doesn't happen to any one of you. Okay, so uh, we've talked about the components of listening, and here we're talking about the barriers, which means what makes us not listen. Okay, so we've just talked about that part here. All right. How can you effectively listen? I guess it's a $1 million question. You have to sit up straight. You have to focus on the message. Most of the time, you've got to tell yourself, "Okay, it's time to focus again. Don't lose focus. Stay here." All right. One way to do that is actually just kind of when someone's saying something, have a little like periodic mental summary in your head. All right, these were the two things this person talked about. Okay, let's move on. Right. Something like that could actually help you retain information. And one very important thing and difficult thing to do is actually to suspend judgment, to say, I'm going to give this guy a shot, right? Or I'm going to give this teacher a shot, right? I'm going to actually just honestly listen to what she has to say. It's not all junk. It's not all crap. Maybe, she's telling me something it's going to benefit me somewhere. Okay. So if you suspend judgment, that helps. All right. Um, but when people have any kind of preconceived notion about anything, like about a class or about a math class, it's going to be hard. Like that's a preconceived notion, right? I mean, then you're paying less attention because you're like switched off in some way. Um, and then, of course, you start listening to something and you start saying, oh my God, this is just nonsense. Or, oh my God, this is just amazing, right? Yeah, either way, I think it hampers your ability to really listen because you're overwhelmed in some way in your brain of hating something or loving something to be able to really focus on the message. So, be conscious of that. I don't think you can just completely avoid it. I mean, we all fall into that trap, but in general, you focus on the message, try to be on task and make those periodic mental notes and suspend judgment as much as you can to be an effective listener. Okay, so we've talked about the first two components. Let's move on to the third one, identify and implement listening strategies. Okay. A lot of this stuff we already know. So it's more like a reminder to you, for me, about just being mindful, practice mindfulness and active listening, pay more attention to what's going on, make an effort to listen, try and be, mentally, physically there, right? Be open-minded, right? Suspend judgment. A lot of times when we are when we're listening, we should be listening to understand, not to respond. But we tend to do that. We tend to listen to respond, and that's not a good idea. I mean, you try to change that. I mean, be an active listener by trying to focus on the message and whatever emotional reactions you have to that message, that's okay. Be conscious of the fact that you may be feeling any kind of heightened emotion. Um, if you're angry or too excited or the language is kind of inappropriate, or basically all of those things affect our ability to listen. And so when you are a speaker, now put yourself in that boat, wear that hat as well, and say, well, if I'm a speaker, I shouldn't say anything that really makes people super angry, or I shouldn't use horrible language, or like I should you know I should write my speech in such a way that I'm actually being logical and practical, and not emotionally manipulating people, right? So, because see how a listener might react to that if that's what they hear. Okay, all right. Um, there are four kinds of listeners. I mean, perhaps there are more than four kinds of listeners, but let's say for discussion purposes here, there are four kinds of listeners. Some people are completely okay listening to a person talking about emotions, and some people are absolutely not, right? Some people are so task oriented, they want information, but it needs to be like really organized and like brief. Some people really love information that's logical. And then some people literally, will critically evaluate everything you say. Okay. So know that there are all of these different kinds of people in your audience. I'm not saying you only have one kind of speech, right? But know that there are so many different kinds of people in the audience. And so don't be, too emotional. Don't be absolutely analytical, and mix it up, but know that, people listen differently. And so identify that that can be the case as you start to create your speeches and delivering them. You want to improve your critical listening and critical thinking skills. And I wanted to introduce both these words to you. So, what is critical listening, right? As a listener, you want to evaluate, the quality of the message that you're hearing, the importance of the information you're hearing, the appropriateness of it. Um, and you should be a critical listener. You should evaluate information. You shouldn't just take people for their for what they're saying, right? Spend some time, understand why they're saying that, look at opposing arguments before just agreeing with them. Okay, so critical listening is important, and we need to continue to work on um, you know being good at that. And then there's critical listening, critical thinking as well, right? Which is the process of making judgments. So, right, I mean, you get all this information, you want to now make a decision on what you think about it. And that is, critical thinking skills. And we have to evaluate, we have to make informed decisions. And we can't just jump to what, somebody is saying just because, I don't know, like some fancy celebrity or influencer or whatever, right? Instagram star. No, I mean, no, you're a smart person. You need to evaluate and make informed decisions. All right. And so how do we get there? All right. Now, 2020 election year, there's a lot of this, right? So is this person stating a fact? Well, is it actually a fact, right? If you watch CNN or something, they'll tell you this is not a fact, he's just making this up. Or has it been verified, on some real direct information? Okay. Anybody says anything. Are there enough examples to prove, to get to this sort of reasonable conclusion? Is the speaker giving us enough information to get to that conclusion? Right? We have an influencer saying, hey, this is a great product to use. Well, how many people are actually saying that? Or is it just influencer, or are we going to go look at some Amazon reviews, or I don't know, Google reviews or Yelp reviews or whatever it is, right? You want to be, better at evaluating something. And this is kind of what we're talking about. If somebody provides some kind of statistics, are they real statistics? Are they unbiased? Like who did the research study? Was it somebody who believed in some specific thing or had something to lose if the opposite side won or whatever, right? I mean, you have to look deeper, learn more. Okay, so evaluating the quality of evidence is a great way to improve your critical listening and thinking skills. How does a speaker support a conclusion? Well, they use evidence, right? Facts, examples, opinions, statistics. That is kind of what I mean by evidence, right? That's something you should know. So look at the evidence, evaluate your quality of evidence, and ask specific questions that help you figure out what you want to believe in. All right. So, you want to separate facts from inferences, right? So let's say you're seeing this guy kneeling down and this girl like shy, what's going on in there? I mean, what do you infer, right? What do you infer, right? Same thing, somebody slamming a door, or stomping, and my daughter does that. Stomp, 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 gets into, her room, bangs the door, right? What does that mean? Right? That's all inference, right? Based on some partial information or circumstantial evidence, you've concluded something. That is an inference. What is a fact? A fact is something that's been proven, right, to be true. And something like the earth is round is a fact, right? And so you want to differentiate fact from inference, right? Both these words are important and very important when we talk about persuasive speech writing, right? Or any informative, right? When someone says something, that is not a fact unless that person supports it with statistics or real facts. All right. So understand the difference as you find your sources and make sure that some of them are, facts and some of them are not. And I have to be careful what I use, if I want to convince somebody to do something. All right. Or just even inform people, right? That's ethical behavior to do that. We talked about Aristotle in our last video. And when I'm looking at your speeches, this is one thing I definitely look at, right? So Aristotle had this thing called the rhetorical triangle. So you're seeing logos on the top, pathos, and ethos, right? So all three things are important in your speech. You need to have emotion. You need to have a strong credibility, but you also need some serious logic to your speech, right? So when I evaluate speeches, I look at these three things. As listeners, when you evaluate something, you need to look at them too. Okay, so again, this is something you should know. I hope you pause and write this triangle thing down and know these three things: ethos, logos, pathos, logic, empathy, credibility. That is Aristotle's rhetorical triangle. Rhetorical or rhetoric, it means persuasion. Okay, all right, here we go. Next thing. Constructive criticism, right? When I look at your speech, I might come back to you and I may tell you, hey, you were really great at this. I love this part. However, this is something you can work on, and that as long as, we do that to our colleagues, to our friends, and for me, to my students, right? This is feedback. Feedback is important, and we consider, our classroom is a safe space where we share information and we are gentle about how we didn't like something, or hey, encouraging like we love something, right? This is how you give feedback. You identify their strengths and weaknesses and be descriptive. If you didn't like something, be specific, but be sensitive, and realistic to what they may have gone through, to create that speech. So we use the word constructive criticism quite a bit, and we have to learn to share feedback in a sensitive way, whether it is something we're doing for our friends, or in a work situation where we really do need to be how super careful in how we share what we feel about something we see or hear. All right, and let's move on then to chapter 5, which is analyzing your audience, right? So when you're starting to create your speeches, you do absolutely need to pay attention to, who am I writing for? What do they care about? All right. And that is super important. So let's talk a little bit about that. So there are 3 steps to becoming an audience-centered speaker. I would tell you I use the word audience-centered pretty much anything and everything I do, from what I teach to my work to even talking to my kid or my friends, right? I want to make sure that I'm talking about things that they care about. Otherwise they're not going to pay attention to me. So I would have to work hard to gather enough information about the folks that I'm speaking to. And whatever information I gather, I analyze it, and then I adapt it. I tailor it to my audience. So let's talk a little bit about that. Okay. So when you're gathering information about your audience, you can, do a survey. There are 2 kinds of survey questions, right? Open-ended and closed-ended, right? So open-ended questions are when I'm asking you something and you have a paragraph to write about it, right? So I could say, what are your reactions to blah, blah, blah? And, you write 3 lines about it on a survey question, because, I want to make sure that the topic that I'm going to talk about is something that, how much do you know about it, or do you really care about it, or are you going to be really angry if I talk about that? Whatever it is, right? So you gather information about your audience before you choose a topic, right? So you have some ideas about your topic, then you go ahead and you ask your audience those questions, right? So open-ended questions are basically questions that you expect a longer, response from. Closed-ended are just yes and no kind of questions, right? Or, like a scale, right? Strongly agree, agree, disagree, strongly disagree. So you give them like 4 or 5 options, right? Usually it's like 5. It's got the Likert scale. And then let them choose, right? And so, or it could be a yes or no question. Is it, do you like ice cream? Yes or no? Do you care about, talking about, I don't know, COVID-19? Yes or no, right? It's very easy. Well, what do you feel about COVID-19 is an open-ended question. That would be longer, right? But you see, open-ended, closed-ended. So you're gathering information, and you can do that by a survey, right? So you ask open-ended questions, you ask closed-ended questions. You ask questions if you don't know enough about your audience, right? You can ask questions more informally. Sometimes you just learn about stuff by just looking at people. All right, so I think, there are like, I don't know, approximately like 40% of the classroom are boys. Or, from the looks of it, 70% of my class, seems like they speak Spanish. Just obvious, demographic stuff. And then, of course, you could even formally, meet with people one-on-one, ask, do interviews, one-on-one, we call them IDIs, in-depth interviews, just talk to people. And you get the whys behind, like, oh, do you like ice cream? Yes or no? That's a like close-ended question. But if you want to do a deeper dive, why do you not like ice cream? Like, what about ice cream do you not like? Right? So what about ice cream do I not like is something I can actually elaborate on. I can talk to you about that. And that is gathering information through interviews, right? And that's more psychographic. The whys behind why you don't like something, that's psychographic. And there could be like situational, like contextual as well. So you're basically just gathering information about people that way. All right. Of course, in our country, our U.S. Census they've been doing it for years, right? So, this is a 2010 census. It came to my house, actually, so I just took a photo for you. And that, you are expected to answer that question. It comes from the U.S. Census Bureau, right? And so what do? They do a really quick, like, sort of demographic, like your age, how many people live in your household, education, ethnicity, income, race, whatever, right? I mean, and then of course, you see a lot of market research companies doing the same kind of stuff, so that they can kind of market the right products to you, like things that you care about. So demographic is basically just age and gender, sex, like what you see here, culture, ethnicity, race, all of that stuff. That's all we call that demographic, right? And so that is the information you can just very quickly gather, often through a survey. And of course, you can go through U.S. Census, and you can get some information from them as well. A lot of that information is free. Some of it you pay for. Okay, so in advertising businesses, marketing businesses, consumer product businesses, they often go back to these kind of surveys, or conduct their own research to gather information about their audiences. Okay. Psychographic would be more, the whole why, right? Why do you like something? Why do you not like something? Why did you say you were interested in this? Why do you say you were not interested in this? The whys, the attitudes and the behaviors. Why? Okay, so you see some of these examples here. There's no Planet B. We see some gay right movement, abortion movement, racism related protests, guns, all of this. This is all psychographic. So depending on what your topic is, you want to dive deeper and ask specific questions. And so that is what we call psychographic. So we've talked about demographic, and then the next one here is psychographic. And then, you're basically spending time analyzing your audience. So what are the similarities? What are the differences? And how can we establish common ground here? Because, that's what my goal is, that you listen to me, right? As a, between a speaker and an audience member, right? And so now when you are analyzing your audience and you're learning enough about them, you find similarities, and you establish common ground, so you can actually have a conversation with them. You see a photo of this teacher talking to kids, right? And you know what you need to do, when you have to talk to kids, right? You have to meet them where they are, right? Mentally, in the conversation topics, things like that. So this is what we're talking about, right? When you analyze your audience, if you find similarities and you find common ground, and that's how you build those connections. Okay, and then you have to obviously adapt, right? You have to adapt. Like, is my audience paying attention to me, right? And you can easily see that in, like, maybe non-COVID world, right? Look at people's eye contact. Are they looking at you? Do they seem interested? Or are they just, like, done? They're just done. Like, the heck with it. I don't want to do this anymore. So, that we have to see those nonverbal responses to see if they're really interested in that. But you also have to continue to adapt your message, right? Listeners should continue to listen, right? It isn't about just building those common grounds, but you want them to listen to you. So you constantly adapt your message for clarity, for finding ways to achieve your goal, right? Ethically adapt constantly. And for me, I have to do it all the time, because I teach college students, and I don't want them to go to sleep when I'm talking, right? So I need you to listen to me right now, right? And how do I do that? I adapt, right? And if I can tell if you're not paying attention, because I can see your body language. That's your nonverbals. I'm looking at that. Are you paying attention? Are you responding? Am I seeing some feedback, right? Constantly adapt and be responsive to other people's reactions. All right. So there are many ways to sort of improve your critical listening and thinking skills. Find ways to get them all excited, right? Now you're creating your speeches. You need to think about this, or tell a story. Use some good examples, use a personal example, or, I mean, you can't use all of these, right? You can probably choose one or two, or just one per speech, and come up with ways of, creating excitement. Maybe let go of too many statistics, because that would just, oh my God, put me to sleep if it's all just statistics, nothing else, right? If you're using humor, be careful using humor. I would say definitely use more stories, personal illustrations is a good way to go. Direct references. Somebody's talked about a particular speech topic or an idea, you could connect it back to your speech. But find ways to find ways to make sure that your audience is not bored, right? You know, of course, we don't ask questions in this class, right, as part of your speech, or there's no Q&A, you know, but in real world, I mean, that kind of stuff actually does happen. Like, you know, the whole show of hands thing, you know, do you agree with me? Do you disagree? That can be pretty risky, so be careful using that. And, you know, if you are in a video setup like here, like, you know, you can't really, you know, I'm not getting a response from you, you're just listening to what I'm saying. You know, there is no reason to say show of hands, right? That would make no sense. Sometimes you feel like, you know, maybe your delivery is really slow, and, you know, let's just pick up the pace. So, you know, you're excited and interested, and, you know, your energy level increases, and that would help the audience pay more attention to you as well. Sometimes, you know, dramatic pause here and there, eye contact here and there, all of that kind of makes a difference. If your message is kind of hard to understand, I mean, what I mean by that is if it's a difficult topic, find ways to simplify it. Use, I would say, like more concrete examples, presentation when it's appropriate, or slow down your rate. You know, too fast is not good either. Excuse me. And then, of course, you know, the outline that I've put together for you, which, you know, it will totally help you with the summaries and, you know, transitions. I mean, they're all built into the outline. So if you're using that outline and using it well, I think it would overall clarify the organization and your delivery of your message. So it's something to think about as well. If it's a persuasive speech, you will at least have 30-40% of the people in your class that may not agree with your message. And that's okay. But you need to find common ground. So first, find ways in which your audience will actually agree with you. Remind them that you've done the research, that you're credible, that you spent 20 years doing this. I don't know, I'm just making it up, right? But find ways to establish and build your credibility. Really focus on facts instead of anecdotes or just personal stories if you think that it's a kind of message where it needs to have that kind of impact and substantial evidence um, for people to believe in your message. Okay. All right. So let's now move on to the last chapter in this video, and that is chapter 6, and that is all about delivering your speech. So let's get started. In this chapter, we will talk about these 4 things: how to narrow a speech topic, how to write a specific purpose statement, how to write a central idea, and then generating main ideas. This is a very important chapter. So I hope that, you know, you've taken a break from the last 3 and had some water, walked around, you know, eased your hands, you know, because you got to write again. Okay, so here we go. You know, any kind of audience-centered topics, right? Any, you know, and I've talked about this word before, audience-centered, like do something that your audience cares about, make it relevant to your audience. I'm just giving you some examples, right? So let's say you're talking to retired folks, you know, they might be older, they may care about prescription drug, you know, benefits. And that could be a potential topic, you know. If you're talking to a civic organization, something like Special Olympics would be an interesting topic. If you're talking to church members, you know, talking about persuading them to start a community food bank, you know, great topic. If you're talking to first graders, well, you could talk about, you know, what happens if there's a fire at home, what would you do, you know. If you're talking to teachers, you know, you're talking about building student confidence, right? Something like that would be most exciting for them. If it's a college frat, you know, you talk about, you know, what's available on campus or cool activities and events to do, things like that. Okay, so now you know what I'm talking about, right? So depending on who your audience is, you know, choose a topic that works best for them. Okay. So the first thing we want to do is we want to sort of select and narrow down our topics, right? You would say, this is easy. I don't want to waste my time, you know, listening to this, but I will tell you, for the most part, you know, I've been doing this for a long time, and I know that you will come up with a really broad topic and then you have to narrow it down. I mean, it happens to everyone. It happens to me. So, you know, I think it's important to talk about that. Okay, so let's say you love cats and you want to talk about cats. All right, well, what you're seeing here is a concept map. and I'm just brainstorming here, right? Okay, so I could talk about cats. I could, what do I talk about cats? All right, cats have four legs. They're mammals. Okay, well, they also have flexible spines, and that makes it easier for them to jump. And, they have long hair. Actually, the hair on the cat might, tell you what type the cat is, a Persian cat, British cat, whatever, right? We could talk about cats as pets, and then, connect it to how they could be emotional animals, like, or emotional well-being animals. Okay, so what am I doing here? Okay, I'm literally just taking. I want to talk about cats. I could even talk about adoption. Maybe add that to the list, right? What am I doing here? I am coming up with different topic ideas for cats, right? And seeing if there's any scope here for me to create any speech on cats, right? Informative, something simple as that. So this is a kind of strategy. You sit and just map it out, right? And we call this concept mapping. Select and narrow down your topic. Every broad topic will need to be narrowed down, right? So look at this one. I have health in the middle, but I'm just, oh, what can I talk about? Well, if I talk about exercise, stress, sleep, diet, I think that's a lot. It's a lot. If I just talk about sleep, I can easily just, I could talk like about, 6 minutes on that, with all the different examples or whatever, right? But if I talk about all of this stuff, I'm really not getting in depth into anything, and it's just going to be pointless. So I would say break it down, narrow it down. Just a topic like health is not good enough. It's too big. It's too broad. It's too broad. Unless you're talking about, you have 1 hour to talk about stuff. Um, you might want to choose just one topic, like just sleep or just diet or just just like break it down. So I just wanted to share this sort of a visual with you to help you understand. There is a lot to talk about just within stress, just within exercise. And you can even narrow it down, talk about, I want to talk about health is too broad. I'm going to talk about stress. And I'm not just going to talk about stress. I'm going to talk about stress during COVID, or, just basically just break it down. That's kind of where I'm going with this. And of course, then you have to decide your purpose, right? So am I talking about just a topic just to inform people about it? Or am I trying to, persuade them to do something? Or am I just, entertaining them, right? Again, speaking to entertain is not something we'll be doing in this class, but, and you'd have a specific speech topic just to inform. Because you have an informative speech to do. And then there would be a topic which is all about persuasion. You have a specific, reason, topic, that you have to pick for your persuasive speech. So you have to make a decision on what whether you're speaking to inform or to persuade. Okay, so now that we have that, let's now break it down into, specific purpose, right? So at the end of my speech, my audience will, and complete that sentence as you see there. This is what I'm looking for in your specific purpose. It's a statement that focuses on audience behavior, right? So you want to formulate that specific purpose and you want to write it down so you remember. At the end of my speech, my audience will. This is not something that's going to be a part of your speech delivery, but it will absolutely be a part of your speech outline. So at the end of my speech, my audience will learn about one of the most famous tragedies in history, the Titanic, and how it inspired the classic movie. What a beautiful speech. It's going to be so fun to listen to that. But what I'm doing here is I'm formulating the specific purpose. At the end of my speech, my audience will learn about 5 important things lifeguards do as part of their job. Okay, so what are we doing here? We're formulating a specific purpose that focuses on your audience behavior. My audience will learn about, my audience will learn about, my audience, whatever it is, right? You want to formulate your specific purpose, and that's what you're seeing in this particular slide here. And here are some guidelines. So again, this is already in your book, in your textbook. So you might, when you look at that, it will refresh what we've just talked about. Use words that are that have like observable, measurable behavior. So at the end of my speech, the audience will know something about Hannibal misery versus, they will be able to list 5 points of interest in this town is a lot more observable. And that's what we are looking for. All right. And single idea. At the end of my speech, my audience will be able to write a simple computer program in just basic and also play this game. No, 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 no. Focus on one idea. Okay. So at the end of my speech, my audience will write a simple computer program in just basic, right? Limit the specific purpose to a single idea. And then also reflect the interest and the expectations and the knowledge level of your audience, okay? So at the end of my speech, the audience will be able to write a successful college essay. Well, you haven't really defined to me what success means to you. All right. So, what is the expectation? At the end of my speech, my audience will be able to write a coherent, organized essay exam. Okay. So, that is, these are some of the guidelines. Use words that are more measurable, limit the purpose to a single idea, and, make clear, reflect the expectations and the knowledge level of your audience. Okay. So remember to state a single audience-centered central idea. Okay, so now we've talked about purpose, general purpose, specific purpose. I'm talking to you now about central idea. It focuses on the content of the speech. So state your single audience-centered central idea with direct and specific language. Now it has to be as one declarative sentence. Okay, so that's what you need to do for that one. So let me give you an example here. All right, I love this visual, and I know I'm not really allowed to use it, but it's there. With the whole watermark and everything, and I apologize for that, but I love the visual. It's really cute. So let's say your topic is computers, and your general purpose is to inform, which would be your first speech, right? And your specific purpose, hey, look, we started the sentence with at the end of my speech. That's what I need, right? At the end of my speech, my audience will learn how to build a computer. Okay, central idea. Building your own computer is an easy, inexpensive way to own a powerful desktop computer. And I can, from that central idea, know very clearly what exactly this particular speech topic is going to look like. A central idea, I'm going back to single idea with a direct specific language. Okay, it will focus on the content of your speech. Okay, so let's then move on. How to develop your central idea. Okay, so you want to make sure that it is specific, it is direct. So do not central idea should not say in my opinion, ever. Okay, so it should go straight to, the actual direct language. So in my opinion, censorship of school textbooks threaten the rights of school children. Qualified language, go to censorship of school textbooks threaten the rights of school children. Okay, the next one, again, we're looking at specific direct language. In December, what happened, right? You're talking about people blaming an unusual weather, condition on an ocean phenomenon. Well, what was the phenomenon? You don't really know that. You want to, make it more specific. Mississippi River flooding, Texas tornadoes, right? And that's what happened to, and that's why, we had this unusual winter weather. What are we doing here? We're having specific language, we're having direct language. This is really important as you create your central ideas. Okay, so let's look at this one. Deforestation by lumber interests and toxic waste dumping are major environmental problems in the US today versus toxic waste dumping is a major environmental problem in the US today. Now, we talked about a central idea, right? It should be a single idea. So should it be number one or should it be number two? What do you think is the right way to write the central idea? Of course, the answer is number two, right? Toxic waste dumping is a major environmental problem in the US today. And why? Because we're talking about a single idea. Deforestation is a second idea. It becomes just a really broad topic. You need to really kind of narrow it down, have a specific purpose, and then develop your central idea. All right, last slide. Think of your speech as, a building blueprint, right? When you have to build a structure, if anybody has family in construction, you need a blueprint. You first get the blueprint approved, and then you can build something, right? So, this is the same thing. If you want to build your speech, you want to have these three things, right? You want to have a central idea. You want to have logical divisions, like the way you see this lady sorting contents in her closet. And then you want to preview those ideas. Okay, so what we want to pay attention to is breaking things up, right? You put your bedding and your clothing and your towels in 3 different sections, right? In the same way, every speech needs to have, these logical divisions. And then you preview those main ideas before you really start talking about that in your body. Okay, so that's that. We've looked at a crazy 62 slides, but I'm hoping that we have done justice to the 4 chapters in your book, chapters 4, 5, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so hopefully you will look at all of the stuff. Um, yeah, hopefully more than once. If once, please go look at your textbook as well so you get a revision. You're going to need all the stuff for your quizzes. And if you've listened to all of this, I think you will do well in the final speeches as well. All right, so that's that. Thank you.